Okay, let's talk about data policies and a few things to be aware of dealing with the disposal retention of our data. Okay, so wiping is first and foremost. Wiping, as you know, is much different than deleting a file. So if we want to delete something, obviously we right click on it, hit delete, or we drag it to the recycle bin or whatever the OS procedure is to delete that file. Well, it's not actually gone. All right, so we simply pull that out of the table of contents, so to speak, but the ones and zeros are still on the disk. If we want to actually make sure that that data is gone, then we need to wipe it. And by wiping a file, we overwrite it X number of times. Okay, well, it could be any number of passes. 1 pass, 3 pass, 7 passes, so on and so forth. There are a number of tools out there that can do this. I happen to have an example of one called Eraser. But every antivirus package out there, for the most part, Symantec, McAfee, I mean, you name it. There's so many tools out there that can wipe data. It's just a matter of preference as to which one you use. However, just understand that generally speaking, if you overwrite a file more than 3 times, it's generally not recoverable. The Department of Defense kind of standard for secure wiping is 7 passes. So if you overwrite that file 7 times, it's not going to be recoverable unless you're talking, like NSA level recovery. I'm sure they have some method of recovering beyond what's the average company or the average law enforcement agency would have. Again, for most corporate environments, 7 passes and it's gone. Okay, next would be the disposing. Again, policies. We're talking about policies here. The disposal of data is set obviously by your company policy, but it should include wiping of drives prior to disposal. So if you're going to turn those drives either back to a company, let's say you have a large storage array and you're going to trade that storage array in, buy a new one, or get rid of it, or even sell it to someone else, you want to make sure that you dispose of the data on those drives. Now you can either wipe them, as I said. There are tools out there that can wipe a full array. There are hardware devices that you can pull the drives out, plug them into this hardware device, and that will go through and wipe the data. Or you can put them through some type of degaussing equipment that is basically a large electromagnet that will erase the data off the drives. Or if they're SSDs, again, you need to make sure that they are electronically erased. SSDs have a different procedure than magnetic disks, just because of the nature of how data is written to those devices. Make sure that data is not just deleted, but wiped or otherwise disposed of prior to getting rid of. Okay, next, data policies around retention. Again, it really just depends upon your company. Retention policies will vary, obviously by company, but also by industry. Some industries need to retain records for compliance or legal holds. Other companies and other industries purposely don't retain data. So that way that data is not legally discoverable in the event of a lawsuit. If you have that data retained or stored, then it is discoverable. So by policies, some companies say, you know what, after 30 days, we're getting rid of it. That way, if somebody comes back 6 months, a year, 2 years later, we can legally say and justifiably say, hey, we don't have that data anymore. By matter of policy, every 30 days, we delete old data. So it just depends upon the specific industry. And then next is storage in many, many different places. Locally, removable media, SAN, NAS, and also out in the cloud. So policies need to include where data is stored and where it can be stored. Okay, like I said, locally, remotely, whether it's a SAN, NAS, offsite, cloud, etc. If you're using a cloud provider, where the data is replicated should be documented as well. All right, so we need to make sure that whether we're using Amazon or Riverbed or Rackspace, I mean, you name your third-party cloud provider of choice, each of those have their own policies. Each of those have their own strengths and weaknesses. They have their own security staff, obviously, but they also replicate that data in different fashions. So whether they say, okay, we're going to replicate to 3 other data centers in a specific geographic region, that's great. But you may or may not also understand that they may replicate that maybe across the country or perhaps to another country. It just depends. So if your industry or your company is very, very specific about where that data can sit, whether for compliance or regulatory purposes, then you need to understand as the security professional in your company where that data is being replicated to. Okay, it's very important to understand where it's actually living. And of course, how quickly you can get that data back. Okay, in this module, we covered 3 main areas. We covered the different states that data can exist in, whether it be data at rest, in transit, or in use. We talked about encryption policies and technologies. Are we going to do full disk encryption? Are we going to encrypt just specific files and folders, removable media, things along those lines. And then we talked about data retention and disposal policies. Do we keep data for extended periods of time, or do we purposely not keep data? Perhaps we don't want to have things be legally discoverable. And then our disposal policies. Okay, obviously we understand that it's important that we properly dispose of that data, wipe it versus deleting it, whether it's degaussing, wiping, somehow destroy that data so that it cannot be recovered before getting rid of the drives, the storage arrays, and so on and so forth. So I hope this module was informative for you, and I'd like to thank you very much for watching.